Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 48, Holy Matrimony. The episode begins with Ash and the gang in the forest as usual, as they approach a sign that has a picture of James from Team Rocket on it. Ash and the gang examine the sign, with Brock holding the egg that Ash got back in episode 46. It's still around, guys. As Ash and the gang call attention to the similarities between James and the boy on the poster, questioning why he would be known as missing when they literally just saw him like last episode, a man shows up in a huge-ass limousine and asks if they had found the guy on the poster, referring to James. Ash is like, yeah bro, we see him every fucking episode, he's James from Team Rocket. And this leads the old man to start crying in happiness and instruct Ash and the gang to come into his limo as he drives them away somewhere. Not suspicious at all. Getting into an old man's car, guys, that's very dangerous. Meanwhile, Team Rocket had arrived just in time to see Ash and the gang get in the limo with the intention of spying on Ash and the gang, but they obviously couldn't now as they were gone. Jesse and Meowth then spot the poster that has James on it, questioning why James was on the poster, just as Ash and the gang did. James denies that that's him on the poster for some reason, indicating that he was ashamed of something from his childhood, and he defends his point by saying that the kid on the poster looked way too ugly. Meowth responds that James was ugly, and that's part of the reason why they were so confident that James was on the poster, which pisses James off, and he gets even more pissed off when Jesse suggests that they follow the limo that Ash and his friends were dragged off in, insisting that it could lead them to clues as to who put up this poster with James. James, obviously knowing something about the limo, is hesitant to go along with Jesse and Meowth, but doesn't want to be left behind, so he reluctantly decides to go. Meanwhile, the limo is driving, and Ash and the gang complain about how long it was taking to get to their destination, even though the old man gave them tea for the ride and everything. Misty then further states how she felt like it's been like 30 minutes and was pissed that they weren't at their destination yet. Dude, 30 minutes? As someone who lives in the country, it takes us 30 minutes just to get into civilization. You're complaining about a 30-minute limousine ride? Really? The old man, likely tired of Misty's complaining as well, informs Ash and the gang that they've almost arrived at their destination, which is a mansion. This is ironic, as they pass by a mansion as he says this. Ash and the gang are in pure amazement at the size of this mansion, with Brock mentioning how he's seen superstores that were smaller than it, wondering who the owner was, with the old man confirming that although it wasn't their destination, it was linked to their destination, which was James's mansion. This mansion, though, wasn't their destination. It was just James's Growlithe playhouse. That's right, James's Growlithe had an entire fucking mansion all to itself, and that meant that James's family owned 2 mansions. Ash and the gang then arrive at their destination, being the main mansion, and are in pure fucking amazement at the sheer size of it. It blows Growlithe's one out of the water, holy fuck. Meanwhile, Team Rocket had arrived at the mansion as well, with Meowth and Jesse obviously also impressed at the sheer size and scope of the place. James still didn't want to be there though, further insinuating that he was really ashamed of his past. The old man, who reveals himself as James's family butler named Hopkins, then directs Ash and the gang inside the mansion, where they immediately are amazed by everything in it, but then they spot 2 coffins. This obviously freaks out Ash and the gang, who question if the reason why they were there was because a funeral was happening, and Hopkins proceeds to explain that people had in fact died, although there wasn't going to be a funeral. The people that died were unfortunately James's parents, who had just passed away that morning. He then reveals that the reason why he was looking for James in the first place was because now that his parents were dead, he was the sole heir to all of their riches, meaning James would get some heavy cash. However, Hopkins adds that James could potentially lose out on the riches in 24 hours if he doesn't marry the arranged marriage that his parents originally had planned for him, as if he doesn't marry, then all the money will go to charity. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was spying on Hopkins and Ash and the gang from a nearby window to the mansion, and Jesse and Meowth exclaimed in shock at how shocked they were that James was rich and he never told them. James doesn't reply to them as he's too preoccupied after just finding out that his parents were fucking dead, but he was more so distraught at the fact that he was going to have to marry in 24 hours. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang had decided to go and take a breather outside, questioning if they should try and find James and tell him that he could potentially get all this money if he decided to get married. Remembering that the entire reason why they were brought to the mansion in the first place was because they told the old man that they knew where James was and he wanted to find them, so they felt it was their duty to help the old man locate James. They don't need to find James, though, as he falls from the roof with Jesse and Meowth due to them fighting. The reason why they were fighting was because Jesse and Meowth wanted James to get married as soon as possible so that they could get all the riches, because they were tired of being broke fucks, but James absolutely refused to get married. This causes Ash and Brock to yell at Jesse, demanding that she stop hitting him, explaining that it was James's decision if he wanted to get married or not. It didn't fucking matter if Jesse wanted that money. It wasn't worth it if James had to suffer. Meowth then retorts that any amount of suffering of James was worth it for the amount of money that he would get. But then James suddenly collapses to the ground, still trying to deny his past because of how ashamed he was of it for some reason, stating that he couldn't remember anything from his past and had amnesia. He said the only memory that he could recall prior to his past with the bike gang mentioned back in episode 36, along with how he was expelled from the Pokemon Tech School, which was mentioned all the way back in episode 9, was when he was with his Growlithe named Growly on a dark stormy night one winter, and died of both hunger and coldness as he looked up into the sky and spotted angels as he died, and his Growlithe looked on in sadness, howling into the night. James then adds that he remembers his last words being to tell his Growlithe to save itself, and this just makes Jesse, Ash, and Brock cry even more than they already were, absolutely saddened by James' story. Misty, however, being the only smart one for once, obviously realizes that James was making up a bullshit story. As James never died, he's fucking alive. Not wanting to draw suspicion for making up a fake story, James reasons that the amnesia wasn't just making him forgetful, but implanting false memories inside his head. Jesse obviously thinks this is stupid, and just explains to James that he had a family that was rich and could get money if he got married. James acts like the amnesia made him forget this, and runs away like he would if he just heard it for the first time. However, Meowth and Jesse then use a lasso to lasso James back in. Accepting the fact that James would never simply agree to get married, they decide to reason with him, really wanting the money, that instead he should just fake the wedding and then run off with the money afterwards. James still refuses to go through with the plan, so Jesse and Meowth take things into their own hands, taking advantage of the fact that they thought that James still had amnesia, so he would just forget all of their abuse later. At least they thought. But they essentially abuse James to the point where they turn him into their slave. Putting James into a professional blue suit and putting on costumes that they believed were invisible themselves as they got behind James and gagged up his mouth so that they could essentially act as him. So basically, what their plan was to act as James's conduit, essentially speaking for him, believing that no one would be able to see Jesse and Meowth since they were wearing costumes that they claimed were invisible. Now, why would they claim that they suddenly had invisible costumes? Like, I know we're in the Pokemon world, but what fucking sense does that make, physics-wise? But they did believe they were invisible as they went up, controlling James, and knocked on the mansion door, which led to James's butler Hopkins answering, and excitedly stating how James was back, excited to finally see that he had returned of his own accord. Meanwhile, Ash, Misty, and Brock were the ones doing the spying this time, as opposed to Team Rocket, as they watched Jesse and Meowth, essentially role-playing as James, bring James into the mansion, stating how they wanted the money. They feel bad for James, obviously, as even though they had their gripes with Team Rocket, they didn't stand for slavery, and they question why James's butler seemingly hadn't noticed Jesse and Meowth standing behind James, as they obviously weren't invisible. Like, is Hopkins blind or some shit? Like, how does he not see them? Meanwhile, Hopkins had brought Team Rocket to the coffins, and sadly informed James of his parents' passing. Forgetting that she was still supposed to be speaking as James, then bitterly states how she didn't care about James's parents' death, and that they only wanted the money. The butler believes that this came out of James's mouth, and is shocked that James would say something like this, leading Jesse to get embarrassed at her mistake. Jesse then hears laughter, implying that someone had caught on to her mistake, as it's revealed that the laughter came from the coffins, as James's parents pop out of the coffins, revealing themselves, only to do a motto similar to Team Rocket's. This implies that James was the one to originally come up with the motto, as it must have been related to his family in some way. Anyways, this reveals that James's parents had faked their death in order so that they could convince James to come home and finally marry the woman who they wanted to marry. This makes James so frustrated that he yells out, breaking his amnesia facade, stating how he knew his parents would pull something like this in order to make him marry someone, stating to Jesse and James that that was the reason why he was so hesitant to come back in the first place, reiterating that he really didn't want to get married. Jesse and Meowth then yell at James for faking his amnesia facade, truly believing that he actually had it. As Ash and the gang realize what James's parents had done and try to make sense of it, like, damn, James's parents must really hate him if they were willing to fake their deaths just so that they could force him to marry a girl. Like, holy fuck. James then gets up and tries to escape from Jesse and Meowth's grasp so that he can run out of the house, but unfortunately, Hopkins, despite being an old dude, is able to restrain James and drags him up the stairs with his parents, where they force him into a room. It is upstairs where James's parents reveal their reasoning for wanting James to get married so bad, being so that he can continue their family line. But really, it's probably just because they don't want their money to go to charity instead, because they're rich and they hate charity. That'd be fucking ironic. James angrily reiterates how he doesn't want to get married, as his potential bride then reveals herself. And Meowth instantly notices that she looks exactly like Jesse does. So that's always been a funny coincidence to me. Like, what are the chances that the chick that James's parents had picked out for James to marry looked like Jesse? And they picked her out all these years ago, too. The woman initially hides her face behind a fan, shy to see James after all these years, but then she excitedly states how she wanted to marry him and make James into more of a man than he was right now. She then reveals that her name is Jezebel, which James tells Meowth and Jesse that he already knew, and that's why he was so hesitant to come back, because he hated Jezebel so much and didn't want to marry her. Jesse and Meowth explain that they don't give a shit about James's feelings, and say that they just wanted the inheritance, and tell James to go through with the wedding yet again, not backing down. Meanwhile, Ash, Brock, and Misty had walked up the stairs and were spying on Jesse and James, and questioned once again how no one seemed to notice that Jesse and James weren't invisible. I mean, the butler had even physically touched Jesse and James at this point, because he had brought them up the stairs when he forced James upstairs. So, like, how did they not notice? Jezebel even accused James of talking to himself when he was arguing with Jesse and Meowth, so that implies that she couldn't see Jesse and Meowth either. However, there was also seemingly something that implied that she could, as she then takes James down to the vault to count his inheritance. How would she know that Jessie and Meowth wanted to see the inheritance and wanted the inheritance so bad if she couldn't see them, right? This is suspicious, along with the fact that James's parents were laughing after Jessie spoke. This implies that they know more than they let on. Ash and the gang have also gone downstairs into the vault at this point, and watch as Team Rocket naively follow Jezebel, unaware of her plan, as she leads them in to a gym room as opposed to the vault like she promised. Ash and the gang are initially confused by this, as are Team Rocket. As James realizes that Jessie and Meowth had been tricked, come down into the vault. He breaks free of their control and scolds them for being so foolish, as just then his parents show up and tell him that they had instructed Jezebel to bring him here in order to teach him a lesson, and added that they did in fact know that Jessie and Meowth were right there. It turns out that they weren't blind after all. Essentially, this entire time, everyone only pretended to not see Jessie and Meowth, knowing how much that they wanted the money after hearing them in the coffin, and that gave them the idea to lure Meowth and Jessie into this basement, where they could now give James a lesson for not coming home after all these years, and marry him like he was supposed to. This lesson involved Jezebel smacking James with a whip and torturing him through various other methods. So basically, the parents wanted James to get married so bad, they were okay with him being tortured. You gotta love it. Brock and Misty then see Jezebel pull out the whip, and Brock starts to blush. Damn, Brock, I knew you were a womanizer, but I didn't know you were into such kinky things as well. Holy fuck. Seeing James getting whipped, Jessie and Meowth finally decide to show James some respect this episode, as they throw a smoke bomb to distract Jezebel and cause smoke to go everywhere, allowing James a chance to escape. However, James isn't able to get far, as Jezebel spots him and continues chasing after him with her whip. James's parents watched this in amusement, claiming that this was a match made in heaven, so they were clearly into some kinky shit too then, damn. James looks over and sees his parents just drinking fucking tea while he's getting his ass beat, and calls them lousy-ass parents. Dude, I would have worse words for them than lousy-ass parents if they were allowing this, man. Jezebel then continues to chase after James, demanding that she obey him. Like, damn, okay, this is really kinky now. And she wants him to obey her so much that she decides to increase the punishment level from beyond just a whip, and sends out her Vileplume, even as she knocks James over with the whip. Ash uses his Pokedex on Vileplume while simply sitting and watching with Misty and Brock, as they had decided to not get involved in Team Rocket's drama, and to be honest, that's probably for the best. I know they usually help people, but this is a smart move, and it's not like Team Rocket would help them anyway. Jezebel then has her Vileplume use Stun Spore in order to knock out James, and it knocks out Ash and the gang as well. Before James is knocked down, though, he exclaims that this has happened before, as Jezebel says, "Now that you're weakened, I can fully make you into a man now." Like, damn, holy shit. Did she mean that this coming torture was going to fulfill his manly sexual desires, or what the fuck was she talking about? Regardless, though, you can definitely see why James wanted to leave if this has happened before, like he said. Anyways, Jezebel, wanting some alone time with James in his weakened state, then orders Hopkins to boot everyone else outside, which he does, and they are thrown right outside the mansion. As Ash and the gang and Jessie and Meowth recover, Jessie's first concern is, of course, the money, stating that at least James would get it if he got married. This pisses off Ash and the gang, obviously, who are sick and tired of Jessie's insistence on the money. Just then, they all hear a noise coming from the smaller mansion that belonged to James's old Pokemon Growlithe. The noise was Growlithe's howling cry, which Meowth was able to understand, being able to understand Pokemon, so he explained that Growlithe essentially said that he really wanted to help James out, knowing that he was in danger. This leads Ash and the gang, along with Meowth and Jessie, to try and open the door to the small mansion, which was locked, but they fail. Thankfully, though, Growlithe is so determined that it's able to bust through the door on its own and rush into the other mansion and go down and break into the basement through the window, leaving a huge-ass paw mark on Ash's face in the process. When Growlithe does manage to break in to the basement vault, he immediately sees Jezebel hitting James with the whip harder than ever, with James screaming in pain at this point. So I guess the stun spore's effect had wore off, and he certainly wasn't feeling any sort of numbness or nothing, and Jezebel was enjoying the fuck out of it, being a twisted bitch. Thankfully, though, Growlithe steps in and picks up James on his back and rushes out of the window, retreating. Thankfully, before Jezebel's Vileplume could use stun spore on it. Speaking of Jezebel, she was furious at James for escaping, claiming that it was just about time for the wedding, and that she was on one of her final whips beforehand. Yeah, sure you were. I guarantee you she was going to keep going for like all eternity, even if the parents did decide to order her to stop and be like, yo, let's get on with the wedding already. But Jezebel then walks up onto one of James' parents' Charizard statues, because, you know, they need those, it's totally a necessity, and she declares that she will run after James until she finds him. Meanwhile, James and the Ash and the gang, along with Jessie and Meowth, had all gathered in Growlithe's doghouse, with Growlithe taking them there to bring James to safety, and everyone else seeing Growlithe enter and joining. James thanks his Growly for saving it, as Misty absolutely shits on Jezebel, saying how fucking rude and terrible she was. Meowth then adds how Jezebel was just like Jessie, trying to piss off Jessie, and it is definitely successful, as Jessie proceeds to absolutely pummel Meowth's face in as a result. James then reveals that Jezebel was in fact the main reason why he left home, not just because he didn't want to get married, but because of how annoying Jezebel was, stating that she would constantly follow him around like a fucking lost puppy and try and make him do shit. We then see a flashback of James trying to run away from Jezebel even as he was a kid, as Jezebel holds an oddish and criticizes him for how he was running. Fucking bitch. This just got kid James even more pissed off. He's like, dude, stop trying to tell me to do shit the fancy way. Like, all I'm doing is running, and you're telling me to run fancy? Like, what the fuck do you even mean by that, bro? Jezebel then brings up how James doesn't eat spaghetti properly either, which just further pisses him off. Like, okay, James, I agree with you on this one too. I should be able to make as much of a fucking mess as I want when I'm eating spaghetti. James then clarifies that Growlithe was his only fucking friend on the estate his entire childhood, as his parents were clearly neglectful as fuck if they were willing to subject James to torture just to have him be married. And James then asks Jessie if she finally understands why he didn't want to get married. Jessie comments that she still wants the money, as usual, but does agree that Jezebel is a fucking cunt. As if on cue, Jezebel then comes in for her revenge, breaking in through the wall and sending Jessie and Meowth flying out of the roof. Jezebel instantly has her Vileplume attack with Stun Spore, but thankfully, Growlithe steps in and absolutely obliterates the Stun Spore before it can take any effect, and then proceeds to use Flamethrower in combination with Ash's Pikachu's Thundershock to absolutely obliterate the Vileplume, and causing Jezebel to run away in fear because she's too much of a fucking wimp. As she's running, she then stumbles upon James's parents and their butler, who were feeding some Magikarp in a pond. As she runs, Jezebel knocks James's parents and the butler into the pool, which you think would piss them off, right? But no, they still absolutely love Jezebel, especially as Jezebel complained about how much of a loser James's Growlithe was, as she was mad that it used Flamethrower. Because apparently, James's parents hated James's Growlithe too, likely because it was the only thing that made him happy, those fucking cunts. Maybe that explains why Growlithe was locked in a whole different mansion, because Growlithe was being fucking neglected too. James should take it with it then. But unfortunately, James decides to leave it with his parents, because he's like, look bro, my parents are clearly going to kill themselves with their stupidity if you don't look after them, and even though I hate them, I don't want them to die, so you stay behind and look after my parents, but I can't stay here, because I'm going to go and live the poor life with Team Rocket. So he essentially admits that the rich lifestyle that his parents live isn't for him, and he'd rather be a poor peasant with Jessie and Meowth. Despite wanting to live the poor life, James clearly still takes one piece of clothing from his parents' wardrobe, as he dons a fucking huge-ass suit as he leaves Growlithe, saying goodbye to it once more. Leaving Growlithe to howl in sadness. Hopefully Growlithe doesn't get abused. Meanwhile, Jessie and Meowth had assumed that James had decided to get married to Jezebel, as he hadn't returned to them, and they were on their own. But then, James shows up in the Team Rocket balloon, stating, "Prepare for trouble." Jessie should have responded with "make it double," but she does at least respond by putting out her hand, indicating for James to pull her up, and James does, as they're now reunited in the balloon. They then both shake hands as they happily declare to each other that they'll always continue their poor lifestyle, stating that even though they were poor, they preferred that to being rich fucks, because they at least had their freedom and didn't have to do things in a super proper way, like how Jezebel was always trying to force on Jessie. Speaking of Jezebel trying to force things on people, Jezebel was running after Ash and the gang, demanding them to tell them James's location, while also criticizing them for their running, like she did James. Ash then responds as he runs that it was usually James that ended up finding them, not the other way around, referencing how Team Rocket never seemed to let up on their tail, like Team Rocket was in every fucking episode. Speaking of Team Rocket, while Jessie and James were obviously in a good mood, Meowth still wasn't, as while Jessie and James had made their declaration, they were so busy that they forgot Meowth on the ground, which pissed him the fuck off.